Last week we talked about the freedom rides in the 60s, and this week we'll be talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voter Rights Act of 1965. The Civil Rights Act was heavily influenced during the spring of 1963 when Bull Connor unleashed police dogs and water hoses on protesters, when many of them were women and children. The public opinion has changed from 4% to 52% of Americans viewing civil rights the most urgent issue in the United States. After that, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill into a law on July 2nd of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited unequal application of voter registration rules, racial discrimination in hotels, motels, restaurants, and theaters, and denying access to public facilities such as libraries and parks on a basis of race. The Civil Rights Act also empowered attorney generals to enforce school desegregation. After the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, there's two main court cases that attacked this new law. One of them was Heart of Atlanta Motel versus United States, and the other was Katzenbach versus McClung. Both of them looked at interstate commerce, and both of them would not allow blacks. Another person who tested this new law was Silas McGee. Silas McGee went into a movie theater after the Civil Rights Act was passed. In response to him being in the movie theater, people drove him out by throwing food at him, heckling him, and brawling. The Freedom Summer of 1964 and Freedom Schools. The summer of 1964 was aimed to increase voter registration in Mississippi. There was 3 civil rights leaders who were killed. There's plenty of bombings, shootings, and beatings, all in the summer. The Freedom Schools tried to teach African Americans so that they could register to vote. Silas McGee was attacked by the KKK when he was spectating Freedom Day, which caused an enforcement of civil rights bill. Selma. In Selma, Alabama, there's 4 literacy volunteers that went to try to desegregate the Thirsty Boys drive-in restaurant. After they failed, they were hauled away to jail, and a sympathetic crowd tried to desegregate the movie theaters in Selma as well, and they were also driven out. After that, they had a church meeting, and in this church meeting, Clark, the sheriff, viewed it as a riot and had tear gas and billy clubs to disperse them. There was a voters' registration movement that was going on also in Selma. On July 6th, Lewis led aspiring voters to the courthouse for registration, and they were arrested by Clark. Judge Hare banned any public assembly of 3 or more members of the SNCC, SCLC, and 40 other organizations in Selma. In 1965 in Selma, there was Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday consisted of protesters being viciously assaulted as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge on their way to Montgomery to demonstrate black enfranchisement. All of this occurred under Clark. There were stampeding horses, tear gases, and flailing clubs that were shot on video that was shown by TV broadcasters. And unfortunately, there was 2 Northerners that were killed. Everyone was outraged by this, which caused pressure for Johnson to sign the Voter Rights Act. Johnson signed the Voter Rights Act in 1965. The Voter Rights Act consisted of no more literacy tests. So now 60% of African Americans were now registered to vote. This helped with integration. And also it looked at the Brown 2 decision of desegregation and added more speed to it and just empowered more and more movements to occur out of the Voters' Rights Act of 1965.